Hi guys, this is Tech Howdy. I welcome you to another video tutorial on creating an ASP.NET Core application with Angular 7. This is the part 2 of our video tutorial for login functionality. And in this video tutorial, we will code our onSubmit method, which is basically the method that fires off when the submit button on the login form is clicked. And first thing that we want to do inside this login method is to get the values from our form that we have created inside our login.component.html file. So this form, we have to get all the values from this form. Now to get the values from this form, we need to tell Angular that this form is a part of our form group. And to make this form a part of our form group, the first thing that we need to do is use the form group attribute. That's the Angular attribute. So form group. And by doing this, we all have to do is use the equal to sign here, and here we need to give our form group an ID that will be able to identify our form group. And the ID that we are going to use is insert form. Now let's copy this ID here and go back to our login component. And if you noticed, we have already created a form group with the name of insert form. Oh, I forgot to add the T here. If you guys have made the same mistake like me, please go ahead and correct this. So let's change this to insert form. So that should fix that error. Yes. And now inside our onSubmit method, I need to get access to the values of the form group. So I'm going to create a variable and say let user login is equal to insert form dot value. Since it is a form group object, I will have access to the dot value property. So I will use the dot value property. By doing this, now the user login variable will contain all the values from the insert form. And this insert form will basically get its value from the form inside our login component, whose name is basically insert form and is a part of form group. So make sure that this insert form, the name of your form group is the same as the name of your form group here that you created. So it makes more sense for us to get the values. Next thing that we want to do is we don't need to code any service to verify the validation because we already created our login method that is going to validate the user's username and password. All we have to do now call this method inside our login component.ts. And to call this method, we are going to use our account object that we instantiated in our constructor. So let's call the account and then call the method that is the login method. And now inside this login method, I am going to pass two values. If you hit comma, you would be able to see that the login method requires us to pass a username and a password value. Now, where do I get this username and password value from? So I get it from my user login object, which contains all the values of my form. So user login dot, I'm going to call it as username. And then I'm again going to use the user login object and call the password. Now, one problem here. How does it know that the form contains a username value and a password value? So if you go back to your login component inside the code where we have the form control input, I have used the attribute form control name. for the username and for the password. Now, when we are getting the value of the form control name, which is username, we'll get the value of this input control. So that's how I have used the username and password values inside this login method. If you have used a different form control name, like you've used a lowercase u, or if you have used something like name, anything, make sure that you use the correct form control name when you are trying to access the values of your form controls. After that, since our login method is returning an observable, now next, after we have called the login method, as we all know that the login method is going to return a result. Now the result is basically an object. We are not basically going to get a single object, it's a collection of objects. So what we need to do is we will call the subscribe method on that result that we are going to receive from our login method call to the account service. And then here what we would want to do is inside the subscribe method, we will first create a variable called as result that will hold the result of this login method call. And now using the lambda expression, here we can use the values or play with the values that we receive from our result. As I told you that we are going to handle the error that we receive from a login method call inside the login component when I created this login method inside the service, because there was no method to handle error. All we are doing is returning the result. Now if the result contains an error, we will handle that error here. To handle that error, what we want to do is we'll put a comma here, and then we will create another variable, call it as error. So if there is an error, we'll create another lambda expression and we'll handle the error here. So that should be it. So that's how we will use our subscribe method, and we will subscribe to the result that of our login method, and then whatever result we get, if it's a success, we will use the values here, and if it's an error, we will handle the error here inside the error handler. Now, the first thing that we want to do is, obviously if the user's username and password is valid, that means the authentication was successful and we are going to receive a token. So let the token, we will create a variable, and what we want to do is the token, the type of the token can be anything. So we will use any from the result and dot token. What I'm doing here is inside the result, I have a key called as token, which holds the value of the token. So I'm assigning that value of that token to this variable here called as token. Please note that I have used the any data type here because the data type of the token is unknown, because it will be alphanumeric, and so I have left it as any. Now console dot, I'm using the console.log here because I want to see the token in my console, and it's good for just for testing purposes. If you want to, when in development mode, you can always test what result you're getting. After everything works fine, you can just comment out this console.log token. I'm doing this because I just want to see the value of the token that I received. Okay. And also we will create console.log the user role and the message that the user was logged in successfully. So let's do that. So I've logged console in my console the what result I received as the user role, and I have logged a message that the user logged in successfully. Also, what I want to do is set the invalid login to false. That means the user's login is not invalid, so I have changed it to false. And I'm also going to console.log the return URL. In case if the user was trying to access, just giving an example, products, and he was referred to the login page because our product requires authentication, then we want to know that yes, is it displaying the return URL as the product URL, so we can check that by logging it onto the console. Once again, this is just for testing purposes. All these console statements, we can comment it out if our code works fine. Finally, what we want to do is the user logged in successfully, so we want to redirect him back to the return URL that he was trying to initially access. So let's do that. So all we want to do is using this router object that we instantiated inside our constructor, we'll call the navigate by URL method, and then we will navigate the user to the return URL. As our return URL, when we initialized it, it contains the return URL of the user. So that's it for the success method. And now if we have an error, what we want to do, the first thing that we want to do is set the invalid login to true. So let's do that. And all I want to do is here, for now, I'm going to do the error message. I'm going to set the error message is equal to invalid details supplied, could not log in. Just for now, we will change this to the error message that we receive from our API call after we have finished testing our method in our UI. And for now, let's display the error message like this, and we can also console.log this error message onto our console. So I'm going to console.log the error message onto the console. Now I am done with this OnSubmit method, and we have finished coding this login method. And now the next thing that we want to do is go to our login component and make sure that we add an event handler. That is, when the form is submitted, we want to make sure that the onSubmit method is clicked, and for that we are going to use the ng-submit event handler. So when the submit button is clicked and the form is submitted, the onSubmit method will fire off. So make sure we add this, otherwise the event will not fire off and the login method will not be called. Now let's add validation to our form. So let's do that. And to add validation for my form control username, I'm going to first create a div. And now inside the div tag, I'm going to use the ngIf condition. Now ngIf condition is like an if condition which verifies if the condition is true, and then if the condition is true, it will do something that you tell it to do. So let's say ngIf. Now using ngIf, what do we want to check? We want to check if the username, that's this username here, we will call the touched method that is going to check if the input field has been touched by the user, and also we want to satisfy the condition if there is any errors in that field that the user entered his username. So if these both conditions are true, then what we want to do is we want to set the class is equal to error message, and inside the CSS file of our login component, we are going to add the class for our error message. So I'm just going to change the color to red. Save this, go back to my component, and here I'm going to add a span tag, and inside my span tag I'm again using a ngIf condition, and now inside this ngIf condition what I am going to do is the username has error method, I'm going to call it, and what error I want to display, I want to display the required, and for the message I want to display username is required. Now, so first thing, the username is touched, and if there are any errors I want to display the text username is required. I've also changed the class to error message, which will change the color of the text to red. And now the ngIf condition here will check if the form control has the validation error which is required. And when we created our login component.ts file, in that, if you remember, we initialized the form controls and we added the validators.required property here. And what we are doing now here, if the error is related to required, so in our HTML, if the error is related to this required, then we will display that username is required. Similarly, what we want to do, we will add the validation for our password, because we have added the same required error for our password as well to validate. So let's do that. So let's add it for our password, and now I will save this. So if a password field is touched and it has errors, then we will add the class of error message, and then again we will add a condition. If the error is related to required validator, then we will say password is required. If the error is related to some other validator, let's say you have, for example, use the max number of characters, let's say you have added that, so then you will display error saying max character is whatever you like 50 or whatever. But since I have only used one validator here that is required, I'm just displaying the error message related to that validator. Hope this is clear to you guys. And that should be it now. The only thing that we want to make sure is that unless and until there is no errors, we don't display or we don't allow the user to submit the form. Therefore, the submit button we want to make sure is grayed out. It only gets activated if there is no errors. And to do that, we have an attribute in Angular, and this attribute is called as disabled. So call it disabled, and we are going to say what is going to be disabled. The submission of our insert form, correct? So insert form dot, we will set it to invalid. So what we are doing here is, if the form has any errors, it's obviously going to be invalid. Therefore, we are saying if it is invalid, then set it to disable, set this button to disable. Okay, the next thing that we want to fix in our login component.html is the alert box. But before that, let's go ahead and have a look at our client application in the browser. So, as most of you would face the same problem, which is this error here. If I try to refresh this, as you see, the form group it's not recognized basically. So it's telling that there's a template error and the property is not known. Why do you think this is happening, and why you're getting this error? This error is caused because if you go to Angular's official website, look at the definition for Angular forms, And if you look carefully, there are two modules that are the primary entry points of exports in order for your form related objects to work in your application. One of them is form modules. If you click on form modules, you'll get a lot of information on it. Please go through the document if you have time. And if you see, like the validators and other objects here are part of the forms module. And let me go back and go to reactive forms module. And inside the reactive forms module, it is used for making the forms reactive. Let's say we are going to display the validation as soon as the user touches the input field, that, and we're going to display that it is required. Now these are reactive form events that are taking place. So we need this reactive forms module in order to achieve this kind of responsiveness in our application. And as you see, the form builder, the validators, the form control name, these are all part of reactive module. So in order for us to get rid of these error, we have to import these two modules inside our app.module.ts, because our app.module.ts is the root of our application. So first thing we want to do is import statement, add our import statement to import these two modules. Second, in order to use them in the components, we have to add them to the ng module decorator inside the imports array. And let's go ahead and add them. So I will add them here, and that should be it. I'm sorry, I will add them inside the import array, not inside the declaration. So please don't add them there. Sorry for that. I'm going to save this here, and now I'm going to go back to my application. And guys, what do we see here? All our errors have been disappeared. Now we have one more thing to fix. When we click on our login component, I'm getting another error as saying that there's some error related to my app module HTTP client. It's not able to inject HTTP client. And to fix this error, let's go back to our application. Inside the application's app.module.ts file, once again, in order to use HTTP, we have to import the HTTP client module inside our app.module.ts. I apologize, I didn't tell you guys earlier, but it is good because in case if you get similar errors which is related to your app module, so you should be aware that it is related to not importing the correct modules. And this will help you as a developer to debug and find the root cause. So now if you import these module, to use them inside the components, you have to make sure that you add them to the import array. Now I'm going to save this, go back to my application. It has refreshed. Now I click on the login page and it loads. Now this ugly display error message is displaying, and now we have to make sure it only displays if there is an error. Okay, and if you see, when I click the reactive form module, as soon as I touch the username, it's saying it's required. As soon as I touch the password, it says required. If I add something, it goes away, but the password doesn't unless I do that, and the submit form is now not grayed out, it's active. Let's fix this as well so that it only displays if there's an error. So go back to our login component.html, and here in the alert box here that we have the alert dismissible. First thing that we want to do is make use of this invalid login property that we created. So since it is a boolean which will tell us if the user's login is valid or invalid, we want to use an ngIf over here. So we will use the ngIf condition, which will check if invalid login, and if the invalid login is true, which means the user's login details are not correct. I'm going to replace this error message with the error message object that we have here, which is if there is an error, it will say invalid details applied. So correct. So all you want to do is copy this error message and you want to display it here. Also make sure you have two curly braces here. That's how you will display the property value of that object. So now I save this, and that should be it for our login. Go back to our login page, and what do you see, guys? Now we don't see that error. We will only see that error if there is something that is not valid. Now when I click this button, it is not working because I have not yet started my server. Therefore, when the request is going in the backend, it is pending and it's going to throw an error saying that the server is not found. See, as you see, the invalid details applied could not log in. It delayed because, as you see here, internal server error, because the server is not yet started in order for it to make the request to the API/account.login. We will check this in the next video tutorial. But for now, please like and subscribe my channel Tech Howdy for more content like this. Your subscription will motivate me to add more videos. Thank you so much once again. Please subscribe my channel.